I was sitting in the third row from the back when I understood exactly what my daughter thought of me. Not the back of the church, mind you. The back of the reception hall, behind the cousins she barely spoke to, behind her college roommate's new husband, who she had met twice, behind a round table draped in ivory linen that had been set so close to the kitchen door. I could smell the catering trays every time someone pushed it open. I had driven 4 hours from Knoxville in my good navy dress, the one I had pressed twice the night before, and I was seated at table 14 with people whose names I did not know and who did not know mine. My daughter had not put my name card there by accident. I knew it the moment I saw her across the room, standing at the sweetheart table in a gown I had helped pay for, her new husband's hand at the small of her back, her eyes sliding past me. The way they slide past furniture, you stop noticing. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. My hand was steady. That surprised me. Her name was Claire. She was 34 years old, a marketing consultant in Nashville, and she had been married for approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes. Her husband, Derek, was pleasant enough in the way that expensive watches are pleasant, shiny on the outside and hard to read. He worked in commercial real estate and said things like, "We're really building something," without ever specifying what the something was. I was 67. I had retired 2 years earlier after 31 years as a licensed practical nurse at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. I had never remarried after Claire's father passed. I had learned to manage my money carefully, to invest modestly, to live within clean and honest lines. I had also, over the past 18 months, wired 47 separate bank transfers to my daughter and her husband, totaling an amount I will not say out loud, because even now it makes my chest feel hollow. I had done it quietly, without complaint, because Claire asked and because I told myself that was what mothers did. The ceremony had been beautiful, a vineyard venue, just outside of Franklin, Tennessee, all rolling green hills and string lights strung between old wooden beams. I had cried when she walked down the aisle, not from sentimentality alone, but from something deeper, something that looked like love and felt like relief. My girl, getting her moment. I had sat in the 7th row during the ceremony, which I found odd but convinced myself was because they were saving the front rows for Derek's larger family. It was only when the reception seating chart went up that I felt the first cold draft of understanding move through me. I had been placed far from the family tables. Claire's aunt and 2 cousins sat at table 3, right up front. Derek's parents anchored table 1. The wedding party stretched across tables 2 through 4. And I, her only living parent, the woman who had written check after check for 14 months, was at table 14. I did not make a scene. I found my seat, introduced myself to the couple beside me, a distant co-worker of Derek's and his wife, both perfectly kind and completely unaware, and I smiled through the first course. But the mind keeps working even when the face goes still. I thought about the first transfer. 11 months after Claire and Derek moved to Nashville, she had called me on a Sunday afternoon with that particular softness in her voice she reserved for asking. Derek was between deals, she said, just temporarily. They needed help covering the deposit on a new apartment, something closer to his office. Something that would help him close clients. It was a loan, she promised. She would pay it back by spring. Spring came. No payment. No mention. Then came the car. Derek's lease had ended, and rather than downgrade, they needed a bridge payment to secure a newer model. Then Claire's work laptop died, and she needed a replacement immediately because her whole career was on that machine. Then a medical bill they hadn't expected, then a tax shortfall, then professional development courses Derek was certain would triple his income within the year. Each time, she called on a Sunday. Each time, her voice carried that particular softness. Each time, I told myself, this is what mothers do. 47 transfers. 18 months. The salads arrived and I ate mine slowly, watching the room. Claire laughed at something Derek whispered in her ear. Her dress caught the light beautifully. I had contributed $7,000 toward that dress, and the alterations and the veil she changed her mind on twice. I had not been asked to stand beside her for photographs. I had not been given a corsage. I had been thanked in the ceremony program with a single line, my name sandwiched between the florist and the audiovisual company. The bride and groom wished to thank their vendors and families for their support. I was listed between the florist and the DJ. When the toasts began, Derek's father stood and spoke for 6 minutes about his son with the easy confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the room. Derek's mother cried in the good way, the way that makes everyone smile. The maid of honor told a story about Claire in college that made the room laugh, and then the best man clinked his glass and raised it and said something about love being a team sport, and everyone drank. I waited. I had not been asked to say anything. I had not been warned I wouldn't be asked. I simply was not on the program. The woman beside me, the co-worker's wife, leaned over gently. "Are you the bride's mother?" she whispered. "I am," I said. She looked toward the front of the room and then back at me with an expression she quickly rearranged. "She looks beautiful," she said. "She does," I agreed. The band started after dinner. I danced once, with a man I didn't know who asked out of courtesy, and then I sat back down. Claire and Derek moved through the room greeting tables, working it like a campaign. When they reached table 14, Claire hugged me briefly, her cheek barely grazing mine, her attention already moving past my shoulder. "You okay back here?" she asked, and I noticed she did not wait for an answer. I drove back to my hotel alone at 9:15. The wedding was still going. I sat on the edge of the bed in my navy dress and I did not cry. I thought about the 47 transfers. I thought about the Sunday phone calls. I thought about the dress program and the florist and the DJ. And I thought about something else. Something that had been nudging at me for 3 weeks but that I had been too willing to push aside. 3 weeks before the wedding, I had received a call from my financial advisor, a methodical and careful man named Robert, who had managed my retirement accounts since I left nursing. He had flagged an unusual inquiry. Someone had submitted a request to my investment institution asking for information on early disbursement options for my IRA. The request had used my name, my date of birth, and my home address, but the contact phone number provided was not mine. Robert had caught it before anything moved. He called me immediately, apologetic, careful with his words. I had not reported it to Claire. I had told myself it was probably an error, a data breach, something administrative. I had told myself this because I did not want to believe the alternative. Sitting on that hotel bed in my pressed navy dress, I stopped telling myself things that weren't true. I pulled out my phone. I looked at the number Robert had forwarded to me from the inquiry form. I did not recognize it. I typed it into a search. The result that came back was a Nashville area code registered to a business account. The business name was DW Realty Consulting Group, Derek's initials. Derek's Industry. My hands did not shake. They went very still, the way they used to go still in the ICU when a patient's numbers began to drop and I needed to think clearly and move fast. I set the phone down on the bedspread. I looked at my reflection in the dark window across from the bed. A 67-year-old woman in a navy dress who had driven 4 hours to sit at table 14 and be listed between a florist and a DJ. I picked the phone back up and called Robert. He answered on the second ring, surprised at the hour. I told him I needed to do 3 things first thing Monday morning: cancel every automatic payment connected to my daughter's accounts, freeze my investment accounts, and add a 2-factor authentication layer that required my direct verbal confirmation for any disbursement request, and flag the prior inquiry with the institution's fraud department for documentation. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll have everything ready before 9. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in the silence of the hotel room for a long time. The drive back to Knoxville the next morning felt clean, the way air feels after a long rain. The mountains outside the city rose gold and green in the early light, and I kept both hands on the wheel and let myself think clearly for the first time in months. I was not angry. Exactly. Anger is loud, and I have never been a loud woman. What I felt was something more like a door closing. Softly. With finality. Monday was quiet. Robert confirmed everything had been executed. Automatic transfers stopped. Accounts locked down. Fraud documentation filed. I made myself oatmeal and sat at my kitchen table reading the newspaper, and for the first time in 18 months, my Sunday was not punctuated by the particular softness of my daughter's voice, asking for something. Tuesday, the calls started. The first was from Derek. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was carefully casual, asking if I had noticed any issues with a recurring transfer that seemed to have stopped going through. He said it like a man describing a slow drain, something minor that someone else would fix. I did not call back. By Wednesday afternoon, Claire called. 3 times in 2 hours. On the 4th call, I answered, "Mom." Her voice was different now. The softness was gone, replaced with something taut and controlled. "There's a problem with the transfers. Derek checked, and nothing has gone through since Sunday. The rent autopay came back rejected." "I know," I said. A pause. "What do you mean, you know?" "I canceled them, Claire." Silence stretched between us like something physical. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. "You canceled them," she repeated. "All 47 active transfers." "Yes, Mom." "You? We have bills due this week?" "Derek has a client dinner Friday he already committed to. And the card? That's not my concern anymore," I said. The careful composure broke. "What is wrong with you? You are doing this because of the seating chart, aren't you? Because of where we sat you." "Mom, that was the venue's coordinator. We told you." "Claire." My voice was even. I had practiced being even for 31 years in hospital rooms where evenness kept people alive. "I am not doing this because of a seating chart. I am doing this because I found out that someone submitted an early disbursement request on my IRA using my personal information and a phone number registered to Derek's consulting business." Another silence. Longer this time. "That was," she started. "Do not," I said quietly. "Please do not finish that sentence with something that will be hard to come back from." She did not finish it, I continued. "I have been sending money every time you called on a Sunday for 18 months. I have helped with your rent, your car, Derek's courses, your laptop, a tax bill, and your wedding dress. I did all of it without complaint because I love you and because I thought you needed me. But sitting at table 14 on Saturday, listed in the program next to the catering company, I understood something. You do not need me. You have simply been using me, and there is a very large difference between the two." When she finally spoke, her voice had gone very small. "We're struggling, Mom. You don't understand the pressure Derek is under." "I understand pressure," I said. "I worked 31 years in intensive care. What I am less patient with is being treated like a resource instead of a person." She started crying then. I listened without interrupting, the way I used to listen to family members in waiting rooms. When the crying slowed, I said, "I love you, Claire. I will always love you. But I am not going to fund a life that doesn't have room for me at the table." I let that land. "Call me when you're ready to talk honestly. Not about money, about us." I hung up and finished my coffee. The weeks that followed were strange in the way that healing is always strange, uncomfortable, and necessary in equal measure. Claire sent 2 long text messages I read carefully and did not immediately respond to. Derek called once more, his voice stripped of the casual tone he'd used before, something harder underneath it. I let it go to voicemail. The message said they were consulting with someone about their legal options. I forwarded it to Robert and asked him to forward it to the fraud department, along with the IRA inquiry documentation. Robert called me back within the hour. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "these documents are substantial. The inquiry on your IRA, combined with the voicemail, tells a very specific story. You should consider speaking with an attorney." I made an appointment for the following Thursday with a woman named Patricia Ashe, an estate and financial elder law attorney whose name had come up twice in conversations among my retired nursing colleagues. She was sharp and unhurried, and she listened to the full story without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at the documents I had brought and nodded slowly. "You were lucky your advisor caught the IRA inquiry," she said. "What they were attempting would have taken months to untangle legally if it had gone through. You would have been liable." She looked at me steadily. "You did the right things in the right order. Now we make sure it stays that way." She helped me update my power of attorney documents, review my beneficiary designations, and add an additional layer of protection to my estate planning that would make any future unauthorized attempt legally traceable. Walking out of her office into the crisp November air, I felt something I had not felt in longer than I could name. I felt like my own person. My neighbor Beverly noticed the change before I had words for it myself. She caught me on a Saturday morning pulling weeds along my front walkway, a thing I had been meaning to do since spring but never seemed to have the energy for. "You look different," she said from across the low fence, coffee mug in both hands. "Lighter. I feel lighter," I said. She nodded like she understood without needing the details. Beverly had raised 3 children on her own after her husband left, and she had developed an instinct for recognizing when a woman had finally stopped carrying weight that wasn't hers to carry. I bought myself a pair of good walking shoes, the kind I had always considered too indulgent, and I started walking the Greenway Trail along the river 3 mornings a week. I joined a book club at the public library that met on Thursday evenings. I called my old nursing colleague Jean, and we made plans to drive up to Gatlinburg for a long weekend in December, something we had been talking about for 2 years without doing. I booked the cabin before we finished the phone call. Claire reached out in mid-November. Not a text this time, but a call on a Tuesday evening. Her voice, when I answered, was quieter than I'd ever heard it, scraped clean of the particular tones she used when she wanted something. "Can I come see you?" she asked. She drove down on a Saturday, alone. No Derek. She sat at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and she looked smaller than she had at the wedding. Smaller and more honest. The expensive updo was gone, and she had her hair pulled back simply the way she used to wear it in college. Before Nashville, before the version of herself she had been building toward. "I didn't know about the IRA thing," she said. And then, before I could respond, I knew Derek had looked into some options. He said it was just research. I didn't ask enough questions. And I should have. I waited. I've been telling myself for 2 years that we were just in a temporary tight spot. She looked at her tea. But I think I stopped asking where the money was coming from because I didn't want to know the answer. She looked up at me. "You deserved better than table 14, Mom. You deserved better than all of it." The kitchen was quiet, except for the small sounds a house makes when it is warm and cared for. "What's happening with Derek?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "We're in counseling. Separately and together. It's complicated. There were debts I didn't know about. The IRA thing was him looking for a way out of a hole he dug before we got married and didn't tell me about." She pressed her lips together. "I'm not making excuses for him, or for myself. I made choices too." That took something out of her to say. I could see it. I appreciated it. "What do you need from me, Claire?" I asked. Not what do you want. What do you need? She looked at me for a long moment. "I just need to know that you're still my mother." "We are not finished," I said. "But we're starting over from something more honest." She nodded. Her eyes were bright. "I got a financial counselor. through the counseling center. She's helping me understand where everything actually stands and how to build something real. A small, unguarded smile moved across her face. I did my own budget for the first time. Like, actually did it myself. It was terrifying and also really clarifying. That's how it always is, I said. We sat together for another hour, and the conversation was not easy or smooth, but it was true. It was the truest conversation we had shared in longer than I wanted to count. When she stood to leave, she held me for a moment at the front door, a real hold, the kind that doesn't have an agenda. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said against my shoulder. "I know," I said. "Me too." I watched her car disappear down the street, and then I stood on my porch for a while longer, listening to the neighborhood. A dog somewhere. Children in a yard 2 houses down. The clean, ordinary sounds of a Tuesday afternoon. I was not waiting for anything. I was not dreading anything. I was simply standing in my own life, in the space I had reclaimed for myself. And I was breathing without the low-grade weight that had settled into my chest, so gradually I had forgotten what its absence felt like. I went inside and called Jean to confirm the Gatlinburg cabin. We talked for 40 minutes about which trail to hike first, and whether to bring board games, and who was in charge of the grocery list. We laughed at something Jean remembered from 30 years ago in the break room at Vanderbilt, and for a moment I was back there, and also fully here. Both things at once, the way life is when you're not spending all your energy propping up someone else's. That evening I made a pot of soup from scratch, the kind that takes time and attention, and I ate it at my own table with the radio on and the lamp lit, and no phone calls coming in with that particular Sunday softness. I had spent nearly 2 years being needed. What I had forgotten, what I was remembering slowly like the name of a song you used to know by heart, was how it felt to simply be, not needed, not useful, not a transfer waiting to happen. Just myself, just a woman at her own table, in her own warm house, with soup she made because she wanted to, and nowhere else to be. It took me a long time to understand that giving without limits is not the same as love. I had confused the two for so long the confusion felt like wisdom. There is a version of generosity that is really just fear. Fear of being shut out. Fear of being loved conditionally. Fear that if you stop providing, the people you love will stop seeing you. I had lived inside that fear for 18 months, and before that, in quieter forms, for much longer. But fear dressed up as devotion still smells like fear, and it does not keep you warm. My daughter was learning to stand up. I could see it in her, the unsteady new posture of someone using muscles they had neglected too long. It would take time. It would be imperfect. There would be setbacks I would hear about and some I wouldn't. But I would not be the floor she fell onto anymore. I would be something sturdier and more honest than that. I would be the person standing at a slight distance, believing she could manage the distance on her own. I washed my bowl, dried it, and put it away in the cabinet where it belonged. Then I went to the hall closet and pulled out the new walking shoes, still in the box. I had been meaning to break them in before the Gatlinburg trip. I put them on and walked back and forth across the kitchen floor twice, feeling the solid give of new soles, the clean grip of something that fit right and was built to last. Outside, the November sky had turned the color of old pewter, the trees stripped down to their honest shapes, bare and clean, and still standing. I pulled on my coat and went out into it. There is a particular quality to Tennessee in late autumn, a stillness that isn't sad, but isn't cheerful either. It is simply clear. You can see further than you could in summer. Things that were hidden by the fullness of the season reveal themselves, and you realize they were there all along, waiting for you to be ready to look. I walked for a long time. The greenway was nearly empty, just me and a couple with a dog, and an older man in a bright yellow jacket who nodded as he passed. The river moved alongside me, steady and unhurried, doing exactly what rivers do regardless of who is watching. At some point, I stopped thinking about transfers and program listings and seating charts and phone numbers registered to consulting businesses. At some point, it was just the path and the water and the clean, cold air and the sound of my own new shoes on the pavement, finding their rhythm. I had a cabin booked in the mountains. I had a book club on Thursday. I had soup left over for tomorrow and a daughter who was, for the first time in too long, trying to find her own footing instead of standing on mine. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.